I was holding the silver pen over my father's death certificate when my stepmom Victoria slid a lawsuit across the mahogany table. $40 million. She was suing me for every asset, every dollar, and the title to the aerospace engineering firm my father spent 45 years building from a dusty garage into a defense contracting empire. Victoria stood there in her designer coat, a cruel smile playing on her lips, assuring me that a 27-year-old girl didn't stand a chance against her legal team. She thought I was just a grieving daughter clutching at memories. She had no idea that while she was busy auditing my father's bank accounts, I was accessing his classified vault. 6 months later, inside a packed federal courtroom, Victoria's lawyers were practically celebrating their imminent victory. Then my attorney presented item 74B to the bench, a stamped Pentagon dossier. The judge took one look at the seal, froze, and immediately said, "All rise." My name is Maya Vance, and at 27 years old, I thought I understood how cold the world could be when you lose the person who anchored your entire life. My father, Arthur Vance, was a visionary, a self-made man who spent 45 years turning a grease-stained garage into Vance Dynamics, a multi-million-dollar defense contracting powerhouse. When he passed away suddenly, the grief felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. But I didn't even get 48 hours to mourn before the real nightmare began. I was sitting in my father's home study, staring blankly at his empty mahogany desk, holding the silver pen over his official death certificate. That was the exact moment my stepmom Victoria walked into the room. She didn't offer a hug, a glass of water, or a single word of comfort. Instead, she slid a thick white legal folder straight across the polished wooden surface, stopping right beside the death certificate. Attached was a summons for a $40 million Victoria was suing me for every single asset in my father's estate, every bank account, the house, and complete controlling ownership of Vance Dynamics. She stood over me in her tailored designer coat, a cold, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She leaned down and whispered that a naive 27-year-old girl didn't stand a chance against her elite legal team, and that if I was smart, I'd pack my personal belongings and walk away quietly. She had produced a sudden, highly suspicious codicil to my father's will, drafted just weeks before his death, supposedly stripping me of everything. What Victoria didn't realize was that while she viewed my father as a walking bank account, I knew him as a brilliant engineer who never left anything to chance, and this fight was far from over. Victoria had entered our lives 3 years ago, sweeping in like a tornado of silk, pearl necklaces, and practiced charm. At first, my father was mesmerized. He had spent decades working 80-hour weeks in machine shops and boardrooms, and Victoria offered him a flashy, glamorous life he'd never experienced. But it didn't take long for her true motives to surface. Slowly, methodically, she began insulating him from his old friends, his longtime executives, and eventually even me. She replaced his trusted staff with her own picks, managed his social calendar, and ensured she was present for every financial conversation. I stayed quiet back then to keep the peace, believing my father was happy. But looking back, it was a masterclass isolation. The moment she handed me that lawsuit, my grief transformed into pure calculated focus. Victoria thought I was just a heartbroken daughter who would collapse under the pressure of high-priced corporate attorneys. She forgot that I grew up around my father's brilliant analytical mind. I immediately hired a forensic accountant and began a quiet, deep-dive audit of my father's personal affairs over his final 6 months. What we uncovered was alarming. Tens of thousands of dollars were moving out of his personal accounts into untraceable offshore shells. Bank records showed sudden signature updates executed, while my father was heavily medicated in the hospital during his final weeks. Even the notary signature on Victoria's alleged codicil belonged to a firm owned by her brother's shell corporation. She hadn't just persuaded my father in his final days. She had manufactured a complete fraudulent paper trail to his legacy out from under me. But as damning as these financial discrepancies were, I knew they were only small pieces of a much bigger puzzle. My father was a man of absolute precision. He always said that a good engineer never relies on a single backup system. They build redundancies into every critical component. Knowing how organized he was, I knew he wouldn't leave his life's work exposed to someone like Victoria without a contingency plan. 3 days after being served with the lawsuit, I remembered something. 5 years ago, on my 22nd birthday, my father had handed me a heavy steel key card attached to an unlabeled leather fob. He had looked me in the eye and said, "Maya, if there ever comes a day when things don't make sense, go to the garage at the old proving grounds." That proving ground was an unassuming, rusted facility on the outskirts of the city. The original testing site where Vance Dynamics had secured its first military prototype contract. Late that evening, I drove out into the darkness. Rain slicked the asphalt as I pulled up to the weather-worn structure. I bypassed the main entrance, navigated to a reinforced steel door hidden behind rows of heavy storage shelves, and slid the keycard into the concealed reader. The heavy mechanical lock clicked, and the heavy door swung open. Inside sat my father's private off-site workshop. It was untouched, smelling faintly of engine oil and old paper. In the back corner stood a heavy floor-anchored safe. I entered the PIN, my mother's birthday, and the heavy door swung wide. I expected to find personal journals, stock certificates, or backup bank statements. Instead, I pulled out a thick black leather-bound binder and a series of encrypted flash drives. Across the front of the binder, stamped in bold red block lettering, were the official seals of the United States Department of Defense and the Pentagon. These weren't just personal records. They were classified military project files, complete with active federal oversight protocols and non-transferable defense mandates. I sat under the single halogen bulb inside that cold workshop, staring at the stamped Pentagon seal in disbelief. I called my father's original corporate counsel, David Sterling, a veteran attorney who had retired 2 years prior after spending decades navigating federal regulatory law for Vance Dynamics. David agreed to meet me that same night at his home office. When I spread the contents of the black binder across his desk, the color drained from his face. Together, we spent the next 4 hours painstakingly decoding the files and cross-referencing them with federal contract regulations. What we discovered completely flipped the script on Victoria's lawsuit. Vance Dynamics wasn't just a successful private company. It was the sole primary contractor for a next-generation autonomous defense system operating under classified Department of Defense clearance. The files contained explicit federal statutes governing defense acquisitions. Under federal law, controlling ownership of a military contractor holding Tier 1 security clearances could only be passed to individuals who had undergone comprehensive federal background checks and possessed high-level security clearance. My father had strategically structured Vance Dynamics so that the voting shares were directly tied to this federal defense mandate. The codicil Victoria had forged, claiming total ownership and control of the firm, wasn't just fraudulent under state probate law. It represented an illegal attempt to transfer control of sensitive, classified military technology to an unvetted civilian. Victoria believed she was pulling off a clever corporate heist to steal $40 million. In reality, by falsifying legal documents to seize a classified defense contractor, she had walked straight into a massive federal security breach. My father had anticipated that someone might try to take his company, and he had embedded a legal tripwire that would trigger federal authority the moment an unauthorized party tried to seize control. 6 months after my father's passing, the morning of the trial arrived. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago was an imposing structure of granite and glass, but inside room 402 felt claustrophobic. Victoria arrived with a 4-person legal team wearing $1,000 suits and carrying leather briefcases stuffed with motion papers. She wore a sleek dark dress, oversized pearls, and a cool, dismissive expression. As she passed my table, she leaned over slightly, her perfume sickly sweet, and whispered, "It's not too late to settle for a small stipend, Maya." "You don't have to embarrass yourself." I said nothing. I just sat quietly beside David Sterling, my hands resting calmly on top of a sleek, heavy black binder resting in the center of the defense table. Victoria's lead attorney, a razor-sharp litigator named Richard Vance, opened the proceedings with supreme confidence. For 45 minutes, he painted a glowing picture of Victoria's devotion to my father. He presented the forged codicil, held up glossy financial affidavits, and argued that my father had intentionally left Vance Dynamics to his devoted wife. Because I lacked the executive capability to run a $40 million enterprise. He was charismatic, theatrical, and utterly convinced he had backed us into an inescapable corner. He pointed at me, claiming I was nothing more than an entitled, ungrateful daughter attempting to overturn her father's clear, final wishes out of spite. Victoria sat back in her plush leather chair, crossing her arms, a triumphant smirk gracing her face as her attorney wrapped up his opening statement. She truly believed this was the moment she would claim her $40 million prize. She had no idea that every word her attorney spoke was dragging her deeper into a trap my father had set years ago. When the judge asked if the defense had an opening statement, David Sterling stood up, unhurried and composed. Your Honor, before we address the validity of the plaintiff's alleged codicil, we must present Defense Exhibit 74B. It directly addresses the legal jurisdiction and statutory lawfulness of transferring ownership of Vance Dynamics. David walked forward and placed the heavy black binder on the bench. Judge Robert Harris opened the binder with a mild look of annoyance. But as his eyes landed on the first page, the annoyance instantly evaporated. The courtroom grew dead silent as the judge adjusted his glasses, his face turning pale as he scanned the documents. On the desk in front of him lay verified, stamped copies of active Department of Defense contracts, complete with top-secret security classifications, non-transferable federal mandates, and official seals from the Pentagon. The binder contained explicit documentation that transferring controlling shares of Vance Dynamics to an unvetted civilian, especially using altered legal documents, constituted a severe breach of federal security laws and a felony violation of military defense acquisition protocols. Judge Harris looked up from the bench, his eyes fixated directly on Victoria and her legal team. The color drained completely from Victoria's face as she realized the room's entire dynamic had abruptly inverted. The judge didn't just ask her lawyers to clarify their standing. He slowly reached for his gavel, struck it firmly against the wooden sound block, and looked out across the gallery with an expression of gravity none of us had ever seen before. "All rise," Judge Harris commanded, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. "This proceeding is immediately halted by order of federal authority. Bailiffs, secure the doors. No one leaves this courtroom until federal marshals arrive to take custody of these documents and interview the plaintiff regarding potential violations of federal defense security statutes." The courtroom erupted into quiet chaos as federal agents stepped through the double doors to take control of the case. Victoria's high-priced legal team immediately stopped talking, backing away from their client as they realized the catastrophic criminal exposure she faced. The $40 million lawsuit wasn't just dismissed with prejudice. It triggered a massive federal investigation into Victoria, her brother's shell accounting firm, and the notary who helped forge the codicil. By the time the investigation concluded, Victoria was facing multiple charges of corporate fraud, document forgery, and attempting to illegally seize assets tied to classified national defense infrastructure. With the legal storm finally cleared, I stepped into my father's former office at Vance Dynamics, not as a grieving daughter holding on to the past, but as the legitimate cleared successor to his legacy. I worked alongside David Sterling and the board of directors to ensure every military contract remained fully compliant and secure. Victoria's greedy attempt to strip away my father's life work ended up being her own complete downfall. Sitting at his mahogany desk, looking out over the roaring manufacturing floor below, I finally felt at peace. I had protected my father's company, honored his brilliant foresight, and proven that no matter how elaborate the lie, the truth always wins in the end.